Every year before the High Holy Days, we have a wonderful opportunity to come together with rabbis from all over Southern California. I am a vice president of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California, and every year we have a seminar that is put together where we get to hear all kinds of amazing speakers, a keynote speaker, and then teachers who come to talk about issues and themes around the holidays to get us rabbis thinking. And so at this gathering of rabbis, I was very moved and brought to think really seriously by one of the professors of political science, Dr. Rafe Sonnenschein, who had a lot to say to us about his concerns when he looks at America today and he looks at our public discourse, particularly around, the elections. He has some very serious concerns. All of us, I know, are suffering election fatigue. All of us are tired of turning on the TV to wonder which thing, next. What next? And what are they going to say now? And the pitch has gotten to a point where a lot of us are having a really hard time attending even to what's being said. The problem is the discourse, the level of discourse has sunk to such a low that a lot of people are throwing up their hands and saying, I don't want anything to do with any of it. I'm sick of it. I'm done. I'm not even going to the polls. I'm staying home. And I completely understand the desire to just throw in the towel and say it's a disaster. But we as Jews don't get to do that. Dr. Sonnenschein spoke to us that if we don't engage seriously with our democracy, if we don't participate fully as American citizens, democracy itself is at risk. And he said, democracy requires the belief that the people can ultimately get the changes they want, that people who run the system, while wildly imperfect, will be better than dictators, and that democratic solutions can work effectively. Elections have to matter, he said. Voting has to be accessible. There is a kind of realistic hopefulness that democracy both nurtures and depends on. We as American Jews have been given an unprecedented opportunity in this country. Never in the history of the Jewish people has a state been founded to which the Jews were invited to be citizens from its inception and never have lost their citizenship in the history of that country. This is the first time. This America that we live in right now. Our ancestors for 2,000 years longed for this kind of opportunity, and some of them had it for a while until they lost it. They had it as part of some kind of amazing, open community in which they lived until they lost it. And how did they lose it? The same way that will happen if democracy does not survive and thrive. As Jews, we are obligated to participate in and defend this democracy. And according to Professor Sonnenschein, that means problems must be identified and faced. That's what we have to believe, that we can identify and face problems, that real crises should be faced, that problems should not be turned into crises, except when they really are crises, that we not let media narratives drive us into hysteria, that people who serve in public life should be given a reasonable chance to be successful without being held to impossible personal standards, and that young people should be drawn into the democratic enterprise and told, we will fix this with you together. And it means that we become warriors, not only for our own views, but for democracy itself, which means supporting democracy even when the people make a choice we don't like. Most of all, we cannot take democracy for granted in the current atmosphere. To do so risks losing it. To accept the results, the choice of the people, even when we don't like the choices the people make. This is what it means to be part of a representative democracy. And I, like all of you, we all have our positions and our opinions. But we have to live together after November 8th. We should be working for the candidates we believe in and the policies and the positions that we believe in. We should absolutely be working for them. And we have to also figure out how to live together as one people after the elections. In last week's Torah portion, Parshat Nitzavim, we have the assurance from Torah. We have the assurance in the book of Deuteronomy, Lo Bashamayim Hi, that Torah, instruction about how it is we're supposed to live, how it is we're supposed to treat one another, how it is we're supposed to build a just and equitable society based on morals and ethics and justice and liberty. How we're supposed to do that is not over the sea that we say, who's going to go get it for us? Lo Bashamayim Hi, and it's not in the heavens, that it's so far that it feels unreachable and impossible for us to achieve. Rather, the rabbis say, the Torah says, it's in our very mouths. It's that close to us. There's a wonderful story in the Talmud, the book of rabbinic arguments. The Talmud is all about rabbis fighting with each other. That's why it's such a huge collection on really big paper. Because we Jews love to argue. We come from a tradition, a history of arguing. Pilpul is about pulling things apart and arguing vehemently for your position. That's the Talmud. And in the Talmud, there's a story of such a day where there was a huge argument between two sides over, are you ready for this? Whether an oven was pure or impure. A very important machloket, a very, very important debate. And they're having this debate, and it's raging, and everybody's dug into their positions, and they're having this huge argument about it's pure or it's impure. Rabbi Eliezer stands up, and he knows that he has interpreted the law absolutely correctly. He knows what the answer is, and he states his opinion, and he stands by it, and the majorities say no. We disagree. And he says, but I am positive that my argument is absolutely the correct interpretation of halacha, of Jewish law. And they said, that's very nice, but sorry, the majority disagrees with you. And he said, he was so frustrated. It'd been going on so long, and they were all getting so heated. And finally he said, if the Torah is according to me, if my opinion is the right one, then let a carob tree fly by this window. And a carob tree flies by the window. And the rabbis say, a carob tree has nothing to say to us about Jewish law. He says, if the law is according to me, if the halacha is according to me, if I'm right, let that river flow the other way. And the river turns around and flows the other way. And the majority of the rabbis on the other side of the argument say, a river has nothing to say to us about Jewish law. And now he's just, Rabbi Eliezer is like coming apart. And he says, if the halacha is according to me, if my position is correct, then let the heavens speak. And at that moment, a bat kol, a daughter of the voice, the rabbi's euphemism for a heavenly voice, calls out, the halacha is according to Rabbi Eliezer. He is correct. And the rabbis take the verse of Torah I just taught you, Lo Bashamayim Hi, and they look to the bat kol from where it came from, and they said, Lo Bashamayim Hi. Torah tells us it's not in heaven anymore. Heaven has nothing to say to us about this. Essentially, they were saying, thank you, God, for your opinion, but it doesn't matter in this argument because the majority wins. And the halacha goes according to the majority. It's so Jewish. Thank you, God, for your opinion, but we'll take care of this. We're going to argue this through because you told us, Lo Bashamayim Hi. It isn't in the heavens. It's right here. It's our job. It's our sacred obligation to argue and to figure it out here. No authority from somewhere else can come in and tell us how to fix all of this. It's on us, say the rabbis. We may not like the choices voters make, but democracy allows the kind of moderate change within which the Jewish community can survive and thrive. So, said Professor Sonnenschein, so for both moral and self-interest reasons, I believe that Jews have an interest in a successful democracy. It's true. We do. We always have known that we have to take responsibility and educate ourselves and then listen to each other and to the other argument. That's the point of arguing. The point of arguing is to get closer to truth. And the rabbis ask, how do we know? How do we know if it's a good argument or just an argument? Because the rabbis say, just an argument? That's terrible. That should never happen. People get hurt. People are shamed. It's horrible. But if it's l'shem shamayim, if it's for the sake of getting to the truth, for the sake of heaven, for really true good purposes, then we are obligated to argue and debate and figure it out. How do we know the difference? For the rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, the two schools that clashed over everything, was their prime example. Oil and water was their prime example. And how do we know? Hillel and Shammai fought about everything. How do we know it's l'shem shamayim? And the rabbis say, because they loved each other. They fought about everything and disagreed about everything and dug in over everything. But they loved each other. That's how we know it's l'shem shamayim. That we can argue the points and then hug each other afterwards and say, have you eaten yet? You want to come by for a bite? Let's go catch a movie. That's how you know it's l'shem shamayim. When you don't hate the person. You don't attack the person. Instead, you engage passionately about the ideas and the ideals. That is a machloket l'shem shamayim, a division, an argument that's for the sake of heaven. Parker Palmer, in his book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, says, these days we, the people, have a great deal of trouble talking across our lines of difference about the common good. So much trouble that many of us doubt the very concept of a common good. Deformed by a divisive political culture, we're less inclined to differ with each other honestly than to demonize each other mercilessly. It's true. And that's what we cannot have. Or there is no we the people. We have to find the common good. He calls them patches of common good. And he says a lot of us have gotten so cynical that we don't think there is such a thing. And if you turn on the news, for sure there's no such thing. He says, but we do it all the time. We find patches of common good all the time. We do it with our partners, our children, and our friends as we work to keep our relationships honest and healthy and whole. And we do it in the workplace, in business, when we come together to solve practical problems. We've been doing it in every academic field from the humanities to the sciences. We do have the capacity, a well-demonstrated capacity to hold the tension of differences in ways that lead to creative outcomes and advances. We, the people, our forefathers here in America had the genius, he writes, to establish the first form of government in which differences, conflict, and tension were understood not as the enemies of a good social order, but as the engines of a better social order. We are deeply divided as Americans. We have very different ideas about what should happen. But we must be able to say that it is in the common good to hold our political differences and the conflicts they create in a way that does not unravel the civic community on which democracy depends. We like to say that ours is a unique situation, but it's not. If you look around the world, other places have had incredibly difficult times. We look at Israel. We see what an incredible situation she's in, the neighborhood that she's in, and the incredible amount of crisis that is happening economically. Look at Europe, what's happening in Europe. There's so much going on right now that other folks are in trouble too. I'm not saying we're the only ones, but we must believe that it's possible. We must believe it's possible to find a common good so that we, the people, can hold our elected officials accountable to what we want. But we have to figure out what that is together somehow. Early in Israel's history, 1948, very early in the modern state of Israel's history, in 1948 in June, there was a tragic incident because of a conflict between two leaders of the time, Begin, who was head of the Irgun, an armed militia fighting the Zionists for the Zionist cause, and Ben-Gurion, who was then head of the new government of Israel and head of the IDF. There was a misunderstanding and there was a clash of egos, a machloket, an argument that wasn't for the sake of heaven. And in that, the Altalena, the ship carrying 1,000 fighters and a huge cargo of arms, was coming into Tel Aviv. And Begin was in charge of figuring out where that ammunition was supposed to go. And Ben-Gurion said, no, now nothing can happen outside of the IDF and the government. We will be in control of all of those things. And he had his general give Begin an ultimatum and told him he had 5 minutes to answer. And Begin dug in, and the next thing you knew, shots were fired, and the Altalena was firing on land, and the folks on land firing on the Altalena, including a missile that struck the Altalena and caused a fire on the ship. It was a moment that almost tore the newborn state of Israel apart. It was a conflict that almost turned into civil war among the Jews before they'd even finished fighting for the state of Israel as we know it today. And at that time, in a very heated, very divided community, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook wrote an article for the Hebrew newspaper Hatzofeh entitled, "It is my brother I seek." And he said, let us not foul our public freedom of attitudes and thoughts, desires and plans by overstepping the boundaries of their use through force and the rooting of hatred and denigration of the heart. We will limit our public disagreements to arguments in speech and writing and their direct application, and we will not allow them to be denigrated by the vulgarity of the fist or the poison of negativity. And he writes, "Nizkoret kavanat hatzedek v'ha'idealiyut shebechol echad meitanu." Let us remember the intention of justice and idealism that is in every single one of us. ונמצא את הדרך הנכונה והמתאימה לסידור היחסים שבינינו. And let us find the path, the good and fitting path to arrange the relationships between us. ולתיקון מגמותינו המעשיות, that we can further and improve our practical aims and goals. And in closing his piece, he quotes the prophet Zechariah, "Emet u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sha'arechem." Truth and the justice of peace will you execute in your gates. Ve'ish et ra'at re'ehu al tachshavu b'lvavechem. And each person, evil of their neighbor, they shall not think in their hearts. If we can come together in this way, truly, l'shem shamayim, to figure out the way forward together, to make this democracy better, to make the lives of the people who need us better. All of these apples, one of the choir members asked me, where do all these apples go? They go to the West Side Food Bank to feed the food insecure, so that what's a symbol of beauty and goodness in a new year for us should feed people in our community. That's what we have to do. Figure out how to do more of that for those who desperately, desperately need us. We did the bar mitzvah just last week of a singer, songwriter, poet, who's going to be a serious leader because he's also got the brains and the commitment to analyzing what's going on in our world. And so I'll leave you with his words, given the spirit of what I've said about how it is we are to engage, what Rav Kook said about how we're going to engage together to fix things, to make them right. In the words of our singer-songwriter, Bar Mitzvah, in that spirit, when you and I collide, we create constellations. We burn brighter than the sun. When you and I collide, we create constellations, and the world becomes one. Halavai. So may it be Shana Tova, a happy new year.